All right.
Okay, Matt, I think the floor is yours.
Yeah, so we're going to be going on to Guided by Voices. And hang on a second, in the opening montage, you heard a clip from, oh shoot, I had it here. Yeah, let me see. That was
Tractor Rape
Tractor
Train.
Rape Train. And now you're going to hear a clip from I Am a Scientist.
I am a scientist, I seek to understand me, all of my impurities and evils yet unknown. I am a journalist, I write to you to show you I am an incurable and nothing else behaves like me.
All right, so B1000 by Guided by Voices comes in at number 91 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 16 in 1994. Number 516 of all time, it is Guided by Voices' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stone's list. Guided by Voices ranked number 297 of overall artists on Best Ever Albums. So this is the first time we're covering them. And this is actually their seventh album that was released on June 21st, 1994. The genres of Guided by Voices include indie rock, indie pop, slacker rock, jangle pop, lo-fi, garage rock, avant pop, and progressive pop. Influences include Bob Mould, REM, The Who, Led Zeppelin, The Beatles, The Rolling Stones, The Cars, Syd Barrett, Big Star, Pixies, Roxy Music, The Byrds, Replacements, and The Velvet Underground. Artists that they had influenced include Neutral Milk Hotel, Apples in Stereo, Fountains of Wayne, and Of Montreal. They don't have many charting albums or singles. Their highest charted album was 2002's Universal Truths and Cycles, which hit number 160 on the U.S. charts. And I don't know, it's the first time we're kind of really covering them. People listening to them might think that they're actually from England, because lead singer Robert Pollard does sing in a British accent. That is done on purpose. He's actually from Dayton, Ohio. And the reason he sings in an English accent a lot of the times is because that's how those are the artists that he listened to growing up, and that's how he kind of modeled his voice after. And I saw a brief part of a documentary where he said, if I try to sing in my own voice, it just wouldn't sound right. He said I'd sound too much like a hick or whatever, and so he specifically goes after an English accent, which is what you're hearing probably in multiple tracks on this record. So Robert Pollard is the main voice that you are being guided by. This is another one of those bands that has a ton of members. If you go through their history, there's all kinds of people that played with this band. But when they first started, he actually, was quoted as saying that he saw this more of a songwriters guild than a band, and said basically that whoever could come over to play would. It's just a bunch of friends who could occasionally get together, so it didn't really feel like a band. But he certainly is the leader of this band, and he's been the one constant throughout all of these years. After he graduated from college, he actually got a job as a school teacher. He taught for 14 years while being in Guided by Voices. So this allowed him a lot of time off in the summers and different breaks to be able to record music. And they did put, he and his
Can I just say something funny about that, Matt? We're both in education.
Yep.
I think that would be incredibly cool to 5% of his students, and 95% would be like, what did you make? And he'd say this, and it wouldn't get him any more cool than it was. Right? So
yeah. So and he taught like all different levels, like pretty much every level. He spent a lot of years in fourth grade. But he said the hardest to teach was physical science to junior high schoolers. So that was the hardest subject that he had to teach. So yeah, he taught for 14 years, basically from leaving college till right up until actually the time of this album was released, because although this is their seventh album, pretty much every album that was released prior to this they didn't really press a whole lot of copies. One of the albums that they made, they had 500 copies, and each copy had its own handmade cover. So you had your own unique Guided by Voices cover art for that particular album. He specifically didn't want to tour, just wanted to do stuff in the studio, and didn't really want to get reviewed for fear of what the reviewers would say, so things like that. So he's just kind of, this is kind of like a hobby. Essentially this was the album that really started getting them a little bit more notoriety, which led to the next album, which got them finally on a major label, or more of a major label. Was released by Matador Records. So this was the kind of like that, that album that if it wasn't for this, or if this album wasn't what it was, then they might have totally stopped after this came out. So,
So is it, I know they're called Guided by Voices, but it's really him and then like other random people at times? Like
yes,
he's
Josh,
actually...
but there is considered a classic lineup of Guided by Voices,
okay.
which
Right.
which a number of those guys do play on this. Oddly enough, it's not just the the five of them. It's other members as well, and some of these guys like Greg Demos is the bass player. I think he's only playing on one track on this, but Tobin Sprout is on guitars, and he's Robert Pollard's kind of main writing partner, even though Pollard is writing most of the songs. Tobin Sprout, has some assists in there. There's also Mitch Mitchell on guitars, not to be confused with Mitch Mitchell and the Jimi Hendrix is drummer.
I was going to say, isn't he dead? But I guess different guy.
Different Mitch Mitchell. Yep, and Greg Demos on bass and Kevin Fennell on drums. So that's kind of what's considered the classic lineup. And so he was struggling to write a follow-up to the previous record and didn't really want to, wasn't sure exactly where to go, which is kind of funny for reasons I'll go into in just a second. But he basically just wanted to deconstruct and then reconstruct previous material. So a lot of the songs that you hear on here, some of these go all the way back to the early mid-'80s, and some were songs that were written just for this. But basically, they just kind of got together with a 4-track. That's what you're hearing. It's very rudimentary. There is no recording studio. It's not like they recorded this in basements and garages in various places in Dayton, Ohio. So this is a literal DIY kind of thing. There's no production on this. It's just put it on the tape and that's what you get. So, and some of these songs were originally intended to be demos, and then they just said, just put it on the record. So, so that's some of the stuff that you're hearing was certainly in that vein.
Matt, do you know if that continues in subsequent albums too? They always kind of maintain that.
They do, but then they don't, and I'll go into that in just a second because Guided by Voices has a ton of music out there. It's ridiculous how much he started writing. So, but he wanted the recording style to sound like Beatles bootlegs. There's no real rehearsals prior to recording. It took 3 days to record this record, each track taking about 30 minutes from just start to finish. So very DIY, like I said. The music is influenced by the British invasion rock music, as well as what Pollard called the 4 Ps of rock: pop, punk, progressive, and psychedelia. So I think you hear various elements of that throughout this. And but yeah, they're very prolific. In a documentary from 1997, he said that at that point he had probably written 5,000 songs. In 2000, they released a 4-disc, 100-song album called Suitcase. So each disc had 25 tracks on it. And then that was followed by Suitcase 2 in 2005, Suitcase 3 in 2009, and Suitcase 4 in 2015. All of these records have 4 discs with 25 songs on each disc. It went through one of those things where he kind of said, this is the last record we're doing, this is the last concert we're doing, and then they got back together. They reformed in 2016, releasing their 24th album called August by Cake. And since then, they've released 16 more albums. So the most recent was Strut of Kings in April 2024. I think Guided by Voices has 40 albums, but also Robert Pollard doesn't just have Guided by Voices albums. He has other albums as well. And it's been said that he has released over 100 albums in total, various incarnations. So there is, if you like this record and you want to know more Guided by Voices, strap in. You're gonna have a lot to get through. So, but apparently they're a really good live band. They do drink a lot, but they put on really good, energetic shows. And he's still around kicking with different members, not the classic lineup, but yeah, this is kind of viewed as their crowning achievement, and we will go from there. So let's start with John on this one. What'd you think of Guided by Voices, John?
Yeah, they're one of those bands that name comes up all the time.
Yep.
That once again I just never got around to before I started listening to the show. And
I was going to say that too. Yeah.
It's so interesting how certain bands that are like that, like My Bloody Valentine and Sonic Youth and, these different groups, like I immediately listen to in my formative years when it's here. And then other bands that are like this, it's like, like I know they exist, but it did not it did not drive me to listen to it, right? What's also funny is as I was listening to this for the first time, I said, oh, well, now I know where Neutral Milk Hotel came from, because I was like, this pretty clearly is in the same lane. And then with us having done Grifters last week, and we did get a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, thanks to our listener Kev Truth, who gave me a little heads up that, you know, the lo-fi of last week was nothing if you're ready for this. And yeah, that is the word of the day is lo-fi on this. It is as lo-fi as it gets. And you can listen to last week's episode on the Grifters. I don't want to repeat too much, but we kind of went over what albums can we remember that had a very lo-fi feel to them. And I think we sort of settled on Television Personalities as being the most lo-fi album that we listened to before this week, but this one is right up there with that
This
one in
might be
terms
the
of
lowest.
this is the lowest of the low in terms of lo-fi. It also is another one of those interesting albums where there are these little gems of very pretty traditional songs, right? What comes to mind is something like Echos Myron comes to mind, and Hot Freaks is a little bit more traditional, although Hot Freaks reminds me a little bit of, now we're going back to a little bit of what Frank Zappa was doing, and Captain Beefheart and stuff. I got a definite vibe from that. But you're going all over the place. I love that the 4 Ps, Matt, because it kind of does explain a little bit of the variety on this album, because I didn't hear much prog, but outside of that, there is some psychedelia. There's certainly some punk elements, and there's definitely some pop elements as well on this, along with, you know, indie rock sensibilities. I don't want to steal all the reference points, but certainly, you know, this exists in the same soup as Pavement in terms of what they were doing as well, with some of the minor chords and not distortion, but sloppy play at times, along with pretty play at times. I'd say a slightly non-traditional voice, but certainly not a bad voice like some of the other groups we've listened to who almost wear like a badge of honor in terms of the singing. This is not the prettiest singing, but also not bad singing. Certainly it's tuneful along the way. But yeah, what an interesting album to get 20 songs in the course of, was it 37 minutes, something along that way? So you're getting snippets. Once again, last week we kind of went into what are other albums that are like lots and lots of songs in bits and pieces. My holy grail of that is Pink Flag by Wire, which had a vibe like this as well, where it's like, if you don't like what they're doing here, just stay with it for a minute and 54 seconds or a minute and 30 seconds, because they're going to veer in a different direction. I've never described it this way on the podcast, but I would describe it as like a puzzle piece way of putting together an album. It feels like sometimes you're just picking each song and trying to connect them yourself. And sometimes you wonder, does it come together in a full puzzle, or is it more just like half of it comes together and the other piece are loose puzzle pieces that you try to fit in, but they're either not designed to fit in or you can't fit them in terms of your listen. I do like that, though, because it gives a lot more replay ability for me. Another album I reference a lot in that is that Minutemen album that also was around. Husker Du.
Double
Nickels on the Dime. Husker Du had a couple albums like that where there were just lots of different pieces. So it's definitely something that, you know, late 70s, 80s, and early 90s is a way of doing an album that I connect with. And it doesn't overstay its welcome. I do feel that it passes my test of would I want to hear more by them. Do I want to hear 100 songs in one? No, I don't want to hear 100 songs. So that's testing it even in this format. But it is interesting. It is interesting structurally. I also would be fascinated to hear what this band would sound like produced. Because it's
probably better.
Yeah, I don't know though, because it would also lose some of what it is.
And you can do that, John, because one of their subsequent albums, Rick Ocasek produced.
Okay, so, and he's very clean in production.
Yeah, and you can hear it, because I knew a couple songs my brother put on a mix for me once, and there is the produced version of this. To answer your question earlier, Josh, you can.
Well, that's what I was going to ask.
There is that guided by voices out there. Yes.
Yes, I was going to ask, does it exist? Because it's not that I'm demanding that it has to have it. That's not why I'm asking that. I just would be more interested from a discography perspective to just be like, what does it sound like produced? But yeah, interesting album. It passed a couple of my tests, which is, did it make me more interested in listening more of their stuff? Yes. Was it something that I didn't dread going back to multiple listens to? No, I didn't, because it was interesting each time I listened to it, and each time I felt like there were little layers within here. I have a couple other observations, but I'm very wary about not stealing too many of the takes, because this is one of those also that falls in the category of I'm very, very interested to hear what Matt thinks of this album. I think I have a better idea of how Josh is going to feel about this album, but we'll see. So Josh, you first, and then we'll go to Matt.
Yeah, I am intrigued but also frustrated by this album. I think I have a lot of similar feelings that you did based on your review, but there is a spectrum of lo-fi, I think I found the lo-fi that may be too much for me. I tend to like garage rock and lo-fi, but I felt like that was a barrier at times listening to this album because I was frustrated. I was like, I know the talent is there, I guess is what I'm saying, and I know the songs. There's definitely a lot to like.
It's no Meatloaf, Josh.
Yeah, that's for sure. I can tell that I get the British music, theme throughout this. I can tell that by what he's, we've listened to all the British music that he listened to, so I can pick that out listening to this. And there's definitely a knack for melody and like catchy
Can I add
song
one
parts.
thing, Josh?
Yeah, go ahead.
I wrote down that You're Not an Airplane sounds like the Kinks if it was recorded in 1914.
Right. Yeah. And so the things that he was interested in, those 4 Ps, I can hear on this album, and I'm also interested in that music. And also when there's 20 songs in 37 minutes, that is also my threshold for that being too many songs for this amount of time. Like I wanted to hear more of a song before it like switched over. It was like listening to samples of music before we had streaming services where you could only hear like 15 seconds of a song before to give you an idea of what the song sounded like or what the album sounded like. And I feel like that was a bit frustrating because I really liked some of the stuff on here, like Buzzards and Dreadful Crows, Echoes, Myron. You pointed out I liked Gold Star for Robot Boy, Kicker of Elves, which I think is the funniest title of recent memory, but also I like the song. And there's parts throughout all of these songs that I really liked, and so that's why I'm intrigued to hear more. But if it's so prolific and always of this quality, that's gonna be like a barrier. Like I don't know if I can handle like 100 more songs of this type and this like short snippets of I hope that like is making sense for people, but the talent is there, and like what he's interested in sound wise and music is what I'm interested in. But the lo-fi and the shortness of the songs kept me from like this rating higher. Do I think it warrants multiple listens? Yeah. And I did do that, but Gold Star for Robot Boy as an example is like garage rock like replacements in some ways, but kind of filtered through, not being able to hear it quite as cleanly as even they were. So I don't know. I like this album, but with some reservations, and it's a little frustrating when you know that like you want to hear more, but I don't know. This is the first time I've encountered that where it's like too lo-fi for me and like too short to enjoy it fully. So I'm giving this a mild thumbs up. I am curious though about if further Guided by Voices albums. What about you, Matt? You're muted, buddy.
Sorry, I was muted. Hang on. So I was somewhat familiar with Guided by Voices. Like I said, there was a couple of songs that were put on mixes for me. But I was surprised when I first started listening. I was like, wow, okay, this is really lo-fi, because I did listen to that Grifters album last week and was like, yeah, I like this, that garage rock kind of, garage band kind of thing. And this is very much when I read, yes, 4-track tape, yes, like done in your garage, yep, like this is like no rehearsal, just put it out there, And so, yeah, it kind of comes across as a bunch of demos,
Right.
So on one hand, I think that's kind of cool. Like, I like that. On the other hand, it's with 20 tracks, it can be a bit much. Luckily, it's not a long record, but it's. I wouldn't say that this is my preferred production style, right?
Yeah.
I think that producers and engineers and sound studios, they exist for a reason, right? Because they make music sound better as a general rule. Having said all that, musically throughout this is great. There's so many gems in here. I mean, what a gift for melody he has, and it's like, as you guys were saying, I think you said this and I also read this, the Grifters were kind of seen as Rolling Stones, Guided by Voices more of the Beatles, right? And this has got you can see the melody here is just dripping all over the place. I actually, Goldheart Mountaintop Queen Directory, I actually knew that as a cover. I didn't know that it was a cover when I heard it, but it was a band called And You Will Know Us by the Trail of Dead, which is kind of a terrible band name, but whatever. But I recognized it from their album So Divided. They covered that, so I was like, oh, okay. So I do like that song. It's got like this anthemic kind of like chorus that they come in, and it does sound very British. A lot of the stuff has that kind of, taking us back to season 1, where you heard something like maybe it was from the Kinks, or maybe it was from like the Zombies, or this British band that's very pop oriented that has this lo-fi production. It's very kind of catchy. So,
or that Nuggets album, Artifacts.
The Nuggets album, yes,
yeah.
exactly. So there's another song, but some of this like sounded like Yours to Keep was this acoustic song that I was thinking after I heard it. I'm like, man, that sounds like a song that they might have tacked on as a secret song at the end of a 90s, album. It's like, let's just throw this out there as this demo, as this throwaway song, but it's also really catchy. I thought that there are other bands that stood out to me, more modern bands. I thought that Mincer Ray kind of sounded a little bit like Titus Andronicus. That's got a very similar vocal style, and I love that band. That's another lo-fi band.
Another band that puts like 18,000 track small bit albums together. Yeah,
they have been known to do that. Yes, that's true. And Spoon, right? There's a couple of Spoon songs on here, like Kicker of Elves and Esther's Day in particular. I thought kind of had Spoon like elements to it, and so.
Yep.
I could see them being influenced by these guys. So, John, I hear you. The progressive rock, clearly if you have songs that the longest one might be 3 minutes and most of them are under 2, like it's hard to do progressive rock. But if you have a song like Her Psychology Today with multiple parts and movements, it's like they start with one thing, they go into a totally different direction, then they cap it off with something else. There's kind of like that melding of those different sounds. There's a little bit of a progressive type sound there. So I did very much enjoy this record. I'd be lying though if I said it wouldn't be helped if it was more fully formed in let's not just with production, but I can't say that I'm a huge fan of like the short snippets of these songs, especially if I like them a lot. Like I almost feel like, no, throw another verse on that, right? Throw another chorus on that one, put a bridge on that, like really connect everything together and make it like a fully formed song. So I think I think I would like that as a whole better. I think if you took like maybe half of these songs and did something like that, made it a double album, right? And it would be certainly longer, like twice the length. But I think my ears would gravitate towards that probably definitely much easier than it has here. But on the flip side, that would take away kind of a very unique quality to this record, right? And and something that, because you can get plenty of other songs and bands and whatever. There's no dearth of people that can write really catchy pop hooks and make a really good pop album. There's plenty of those out there, but to have something like this does stand out, right? This is unique. This is different, true. Right? And Robert Pollard said, initially they did this style because they didn't have a ton of money, and it was just like a project that he did while he taught school. It's like a hobby. Mm-hmm. But the more they did it, the more they began to prefer it actually as like an actual style. They liked what the sound was. So I can't really knock them any points for that and say, well, you should have done a more traditional album, because then you're taking that the cool element of this away from that. So
yeah, that's true.
So I'm holding two ideas in my head, and I think at the end of the day, like it's still an album that I really liked. The more I listened to it, the more I liked it. I think when I was definitely taken aback the first time I heard it, because the Guided by Voices I know does do more of that traditional 4.5 minute pop song with production and all of that. And this comes in, I actually had to stop and rewind it because, or play it over again because I was like, did something happen? Did my internet go out for a quick second? Because it's like it drops out. It catches you in like right in the middle of a song almost. It's like, no, that's what they're going for, right? And that's part of, that's what you're getting with this record too, is all the missed notes, all the times the guitar drops out is because something screwed up on the 4-track, recording, and then they put it back in. So it's supposed to sound like this. So
it's like Josh editing our show.
Exactly. Yes. So, but yeah, I got to give it a thumbs up. I really enjoyed it. The more I listened to it, the more I liked it. I love there are some more traditional songs on here, like the songs that I picked for the montage, like I Am a Scientist and, Tractor Rape Chain. Those are really great songs, that are a little bit longer. That kind of, take you through a little bit, more of what a traditional song does. But yeah, very interesting, right? So I'd have to say I'm thumbs up. Again, I'm with you, John. I would like to listen to more Guided by Voices, but I'm very daunted by the catalog that Robert Pollard has, and I just think that would be a little too much. So maybe looking at some of the other top albums on Best Ever albums include Alien Lanes, which was the album that came out right after this from 1995. And then that album in 1996, Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. So it seems like these mid-90s albums are their most well-regarded. So those are probably the ones that I would say to check out. I think I'm trying to see the one with the Rick Ocasek production. That is Do the Collapse. That's from 1999. And that one, I can tell you, Josh, if you wanted to hear more of that, like what a fully formed production style would be, I'd probably say Do the Collapse, because there's the two songs that I remember my brother put on mixes were from that album. They're very good. Teenage FBI and I forget the name of the other one. Surgical Focus, that's the other one, but I think Rick Ocasek produced it. So you could probably go in that direction, but it's number 13 ranked on Best Ever Albums. So yeah, so plenty of more Guided by Voices to come. I don't know if we're going to be covering them much at all, but much more. But I'm thumbs up on this. This was a really cool listen.
Yeah, I think it sounded like we were all kind of in the same area in terms of what we liked about it and our response to it. I think we were all positive to one degree or another, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.